Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Broker Breakdown. This is episode 3. I'm here with my co host, Mike, and today we're going to be talking about weather, as weather has been a huge topic of conversation in the last week and a half after that huge storm that most of Ontario did see, mostly northern Ontario, but we did get a little bit down here in the south part. But yeah, on weather continues to be one of probably the most talked about conversations in insurance as we see our kind of climate change a lot in the past probably 25, 30 years, and patterns we really haven't seen in the past. Obviously, we'll touch bases a little bit more in depth later on, but the tornado that happened in Barrie last summer, obviously the storm that happened 2 weeks or 2 weekends ago now, and just more kind of patterns that we're seeing in the insurance industry. But Mike, were you kind of impacted at all during that storm last weekend, or maybe a week and a half ago now?
We were pretty good, right? Being down in Welland, I think we had some rain and some wind, everything else, but nothing remotely close to I think what a lot of other people across Ontario and Quebec obviously had to deal with.
Yeah, I was in Guelph. My girlfriend lives in Guelph, and we were coming back. Actually, I was going to see my mom that day in Hamilton, and even down Highway 6, there was a huge tree down, like across the telephone poles and stuff. Like I guess they had no power, like at least for the whole like Saturday and Sunday, because even when we were coming back, it was still down. Sunday we kind of went out that way as well, and they were still putting up new telephone poles and stuff. Um, all the back roads like had tree branches, even sometimes full trees across them. So yeah, it was a pretty intense, like not even like 30 minutes. I think it was like, even for like, I was in the shower when it first started, and then all of a sudden like it went dark, and yeah, and then it was just gone like half an hour after. So um
Yeah, definitely pretty wild, eh? Like it was. I mean, we don't get this type of stuff very typically in the area. Like we don't get like you know every I don't know whatever you want to say 5 or 10 years you hear about like, these like massive storms, but I think we're seeing a massive increase in just the frequency of these happening.
yeah, no, it was definitely came and went really quickly. And I know a lot of people up like in the northern parts, like Peterborough, like Ottawa area, like they obviously got hit a lot harder. There's still actually some people that don't have power in more rural areas. Um, but yeah, that's kind of just what like the climate and like what our weather patterns are kind of doing in the last little bit, and that's kind of what we want to really touch base on. Mike, I don't know if there's like a conversation or if there's a personal story you want to touch base with, but if not, we can definitely move right into kind of what the Barrie tornado has taught us in the last. I think that was 2021.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only things that I can recall is whenever we see these storms, obviously there's that trickle down effect of how that affects, your home insurance and overall the rebuilding costs, right? I know we touched on this a little bit more last week on rebuilding costs in general, but more from the weather related aspect. I mean, it is a large task for insurance companies, right? To have to undertake, like if you have a specific carrier in a place where one of these events happens, and you don't know how many residences they insure, but I mean, if it's hundreds or possibly even thousands of clients with a specific insurance company, I mean, that is a massive undertaking to get those people built back, to where they were before. I mean, there's only so many adjusters, right, that work that work for insurance companies.
Yeah, and even like from 2 weeks ago, the news has already been saying that like it's going to take weeks, if not months, for insurance companies to kind of get out there and to fix all the damages that caused by the storm last or a week and a half ago now. But um, yeah, obviously it impacts a lot more of the home side of things, but obviously cars are going to be in the way too. Like obviously debris flying around, glass and like scratches and stuff, dents, obviously with debris flying around. And if there's hail, obviously that doesn't help. I know we had hail in Guelph probably for like a minute or two. Um, but yeah, kind of a personal story that I want to touch on. I know I was super young at the time, but in 2005, actually, like right down the road from where I was living in Hamilton, there was a huge tornado that touched down, and like the whole like one street, like by the golf course that I lived by, like was just ripped apart, like fencing, like houses, the roofs like just completely came off. And that was like one of like the craziest things that like I've ever known to happen, like in my area anyways. It was like nuts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I only have a few of those, but what I was thinking of as we've been chatting with this is we've all seen it, right? You've seen it, I've seen it. Tons of people of clients have definitely seen this. But when there's these massive events, right, and you get like restoration companies coming out, right, doing what they have to do and helping out people in need, trying to at least minimize further damage, you'll notice for weeks, if not months afterwards, I've seen tarps on houses for months, right? But just tarping it off, waiting for roofers to come by and do work. So it's when you get these massive storms, man, it does not happen overnight, right? These kinds of things take a long time for insurance to get to.
Oh, 100%. I even remember too, like during that time, like my brother was playing hockey, and I remember it like up the mountain a little bit. There was an arena law field. I don't know if it's still there or not, but um, the whole roof of the school and the arena like completely blew off, and like the arena and the school were like out of commission like for like months after the fact. And like I said, like something like in Hamilton like that, like we've never really seen anything like that happen. And for it to be like literally like it probably wasn't even a kilometer from where I was, like just down the street, and it like the winds they were saying like hit like almost like 180 kilometers an hour gusts, like so absolutely just insane.
Yeah. And how, I mean, the one thing that I think people listening are going to want to know, right, is is there any because wind's a big thing, right? Wind is typically insured on most homeowners' comprehensive policies. It's one of those general losses or perils that you're insured against. I think the interesting point of conversation that we can get into is what ends up being, an exclusion possibly down the road, right? I know that people in the States probably have vastly different types of insurance policies, but I can only imagine if you live in an area, for example, that goes through like, maybe Midwest and central states there, Tornado Alley, right? There's got to be like exclusions to insurance policies for things like that. I wonder if that ever becomes a talking point as the weather up here starts changing as well.
Yeah, and the biggest thing too is when it comes to like catastrophic events, there's usually not exclusions because an insurance company really doesn't want to be that guy or that company that like excludes or doesn't cover something when like a whole bunch of their clients have gone through it. So usually when it comes to catastrophic events, like for example, I wouldn't really consider the Hamilton tornado as a catastrophic event because yes, a lot of people were like impacted by it, but there wasn't like a huge like area. Like I said, it was like one part of like like of the road like that I lived down from, and there was like a little bit of the mountain that was like damaged. But like for example, the Barrie tornado, that was definitely a catastrophic event. So even if you didn't have coverage for it, 9 times out of 10, an insurance company would still cover it because how big the damages were during the Barrie tornadoes. I don't know if you had any clients that were impacted by it, or like if you had to talk to anyone that were impacted by that last year, but I know it was like really, really intense, and like people are still like going through like the claim processes even from last summer.
Yeah. So I personally didn't have anyone that I had policies up in the Barrie area, only because I don't do a lot personally in Barrie, but for sure, I mean that those are hard conversations, right? Because everybody wants to be rebuilt or fixed as quick as possible. That's obviously the premise, and the point of insurance is to get you back into
The
your
spot
home
you're
as
in prior. Yeah.
right. But the tough part is that, I mean, if you're not that singular house, right? There's you might have a neighborhood where, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, depends how you want to look at it, is all insured with the same insurance company. And in that sort of an event, oh my God, like trying to get, uh, all the cleanup debris first and then get materials to get you back into that place. I mean, like you just made a mention, those things take, I mean, it's been over a year, I think, since that event happened.
It's coming up on a year. July 15th will be a full year. So we're about 11 months out right now. I'm actually looking at um, a news article from the Canadian Underwriter. Canadian Underwriter is great. if anyone wants to take a read or wants to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the insurance world, I always recommend going to Canadian Underwriter because they post some really good news articles. But in a news article that they posted, they were saying that the cost of that Barrie tornado is going to cost upwards of $100 million to basically repair all the damages that was caused by. So
Right.
just that small little area that it hit is going to cost insurance companies over $100 million.
Yeah, yeah. And the trickle down effect of how that gets recouped, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, anyone in the financial field, insurance companies there to make money, not to lose it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you're not, that's money that, as a general premise of insurance, right? We all pay those losses of the few among the many of us that have home insurance or even car insurance, right? For that matter. So
Yeah. And it's not just homes that were damaged, obviously. Like if you look at the pictures and stuff, like there's full cars that are like crushed by debris. Like there's like 2x4s through like windows and stuff. So it's not even just on the like the home insurance side, that it's also on the car insurance side. And like you were just saying, the trickle down effect to that is, yeah, like the insurance companies have to pay this amount, but realistically, what's going to end up happening is rates in that area are obviously going to increase to kind of try to outbalance the payments that had to be paid out. But the thing is too, is that how insurance works is that they can't just increase one area. What they'll have to do is that one area will probably get increased a little bit more, but the overall rates in Ontario will definitely go up based on that, because that's a huge claim they have to pay out. Like I know it's not just one company paying out $100 million, but you got to think like $100 million over who knows how many companies, probably a lot of companies insuring up there. But again, like that's a lot of money to be forking out on basically one little like weather event, right?
Huge. And one thing it was more of a coverage recommendation kind of plug here for a quick second. But what I was just listening to you say about just, flying objects and whatnot for car insurance. I mean, for those that obviously are not aware, right? Your comprehensive, which is typically what people historically have said is fire and theft coverage, what the general public might refer to it as. But comprehensive also covers, right, things like falling tree and flying object and a few of these types of
glass.
Right, a few of these types of damages that the average person may or may not be aware of. So for anyone listening, I mean, if you have a vehicle and it's in, it's in decent repair and you're obviously qualified to have physical damage coverage on it, I mean, it is very inexpensive to have that comprehensive for the whatever it is, 10 or 13 different things that it can extend to, right? So I know a lot of people always want to remove it to save a few bucks, but between me and you, I mean, it's comprehensive is super inexpensive for most car insurance policies.
I had that conversation with every client that I have. I tell people, listen, if you rely on this vehicle to go to work, to pick up your kids, to go to school, you need to have full coverage on it, because at the end of the day, if something happens to this, either an accident, a weather event, whatever the case might be, you want to make sure that you're protected properly in the event that something actually happens. Because if you aren't, and let's say this weather event happens and your car gets blown away, like I said, going back to the catastrophic events, you might get lucky and the insurance company will be like, you know what, because it was a catastrophic event, we will pay for the car and the damages. But if it's not, like if it's just a one-off thing, they're going to be like, well, you know what, you didn't have the coverage on it, we're not going to basically like reimburse you or fix the vehicle because you didn't have the right coverage on it. So it's really, really important to make sure that, like I said, accidents are accidents, but at the end of the day, like if you're going to pay for something, you might as well pay to use it when you need to use it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, whether the whole point of, I think, this episode, right, is that weather related topic, especially as it pertains to both home and auto insurance. So I mean, aside from wind and what we've seen the last few weeks as well, one of the things that I wanted to touch on, I think a lot of people will have thoughts on this or not know, is just briefly on the water side there, James. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, water, and that's kind of going back to the 2005 thing that happened in Hamilton. Like I know, like a lot of my area that I lived in that time, we're still classified as a high risk water area. We like any place in Hamilton, basically in the East End, Stony Creek, like any little rainfall, like everyone gets like water in their basements. I don't know one person that lives in Stony Creek or Hamilton that's never had water in their basement. And it continues to be a thing where, like, as water levels across the globe continue to rise, like, we're going to be combating that. Like, that's just a thing that we have to deal with. And like I said, Hamilton's just one of those areas, like a lot of Ontario, we're surrounded by water. And especially in this East End that I used to live in, like, everyone gets water in their basement. Like, after even like a little rainstorm, they'll get water in their basement. And like I said, going back to that 2005 tornado, I knew people that had like water like up to like the roof of their basement. That's how much water we had and flooding we had during that tornado. And like I said, we always get it like even during like small little rainstorms, but that tornado, like, I know people, like, the city had to step in to like help people like rebuild their basements and stuff, because that's how bad it got. That people, like I said, I had friends and stuff and family members that like were like their whole basement was submerged underwater.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that, you know what it is? It's that sudden accumulation, right? It's not that long, prolonged, you know, storm. I mean, a lot of people, if you have some pumps or if you have other ways that you mitigate that, it helps. But it's that super sudden accumulation of water from these torrential downpour storms that cause older infrastructure. And I'll use Hamilton, like you were saying, because I've heard of a lot of people in that area as well that have had issues. That would just the older infrastructure, and let's just use Hamilton, right? You know, it doesn't keep up, right? So the sewer systems get overwhelmed. You know, your neighbor has maybe a backflow valve preventing it coming back into their house, but the average person does not, maybe in these older neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And as a result, it's just, you know, it's coming into those floor drains in your basement.
If you're not like upgrading your home all the time, like technically like up to code, like 50 years ago is obviously not what code is now. Like, obviously most homes nowadays, they are built with like backflow valves and sump pumps, but like living in like some of these areas, like Hamilton, Toronto, Mississauga, like older parts of Ontario, like, unless you've like done massive renovations, you really don't have these things in your basement, right? So with no prevention, you're basically just, if the water's flowing in, the water's flowing in. Like, the only thing my mom had at that time was we had this little drain, like literally, like you just pulled the cap off and it just drained in this little pipe. Like, it was nothing. But if the drain got like, the drain even sometimes backed up. Like, if we got enough water, like there would be water that would come through the drain. And we're like, oh, like this is great. Like, we're trying to get water down it, but there's water coming up. But yeah, that's the only protection we had at that time. Like, we didn't have a sump pump. Like, some people just don't have it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and you know what? A lot of people, one of the things about people that have lived in homes for, let's just use, 20, 30, 40 years is it hasn't happened to myself, right? I've been here for this many years. I haven't had a problem with it. So I'm really not going to consider it moving forward. And I mean, I want to say that, I would strongly recommend against that. Just because something hasn't happened in your basement doesn't mean that it can't.
It's not going
right?
to. And right. Do you find that's like one of the biggest things that people say to you? Well, it hasn't happened to me, or it's not going to happen to me. I get all the time too. People are like, oh, I live like on a hill, or I live on a mountain. I live on like, I built my home on like gravel, so like I don't have any of that stuff. Do you get that a lot? Because I find I get that a lot, that people are always like trying to like make excuses, and they're like, well, I live on a hill. It's never happened to me before, so I don't need that.
I mean, yeah, the conversation comes up once in a while, but I mean, personally, I think I always try to change it a little bit to be, not, because I know everyone's going to have their own viewpoints, right? But it's more or less just at that point about education in general. Like you said, doesn't mean that it can't happen. So are you going to be okay combating that yourself and or paying for those damages yourself? Or do you want to pay that X number of dollars on your insurance policy to cover it, right? It's really the one side or the other. Everything else is just chatter in between.
Yeah, and even looking back like 15, 20 years ago, like insurance policies didn't even cover for water. Like, some companies didn't even cover water. And now, like, it's like every company does. Some companies, they have like their, like I said, high risk areas where like they only have certain amount of coverages, but look how much the insurance industry has changed just in that little time where like weather and especially water has become such a big impact. Like, do you think, like, I know like you were saying prior, like wind is obviously covered on most insurance policies for auto if you have the right coverage, but homes it's always added on. But do you think in the future, obviously based on all this kind of recent weather patterns we've had, like do you think insurance companies will like update or come out with new coverages to kind of combat like wind, even like tornado coverages?
Yeah, I mean, wind is tough, right? I mean, we've seen. I think back in it was 2013, 2014. There started to become that shift from the general industry term of sewer backup, right? And they changed it into different types of water coverages, right? So sewer backup is still a very, very common thing, but there's now overland water. There's coverages like groundwater, even the big sewer line one, right? So the part of the property that you need your sewer line that meets the city's portion, what are you responsible for versus what are they responsible for damages? So I mean, insurance companies have definitely adapted different ways of providing value to home insurance policies. I mean, as broker James, me and you and the whole industry, we definitely have to do a job of explaining what those are. But maybe to answer your question, do I see that happening for wind? It's, I guess, until it actually happens in the industry where certain types of wind damage are affected, like you have one versus another. Until that actually happens, it's hard to say, right? Because I don't think that I would have known about the water changes until they actually happened, right? And once one big insurance company gets on board, you typically see other ones follow suit, but with their own spin, right? Their own way of providing what the coverage is for, what types of water losses you might have in your home, how they're insured, what the limits are. They kind of go through that process, right? So
Yeah, like, but like, where do insurance companies kind of like draw that line though? Because not only have we had the Barry tornado, but even looking back, like just from some, like I'm just bringing up some examples. 2011, got the Godridge area had an F3 tornado, and the insurance companies said that it was going to cost $75 million to basically repair the losses. 2014, Angus had a tornado, $30 million, and then now Barry, $100 million. So literally, just between three tornadoes within 2011 to 2021, there's $200 million loss just from three in Ontario. That's not even just looking at the rest of the like country, because if you look at the rest of
right.
the country, it gets just as bad, because obviously look out west, like you're a little more flatter land, like
Well,
there's not really
forest
a
fires,
lot.
right? Like think about the fires that out
Oh
west
yeah.
typically has every summer now.
Oh, 100%. That's if you actually want to bring it up. The biggest loss in in insurance in the recent time that I'm looking at right now from Ontario Insurance Bureau is the Fort McMurray wildfires, and it cost $5.4 billion to fix all the like losses that came from that.
Right, right. Yeah, that you know what that's the so those numbers. I mean, if you're talking about losses in very urban areas, those numbers are do not surprise me, right? Because I mean, I don't know exactly, but I don't even know what the population of Fort McMurray is or was at that time. But when you're talking about like things hitting rural areas, right? Like the Goddard stuff, like you were saying, where a lot obviously significantly less populations than more like around the GTA. But that's where those numbers, right, are catastrophic to insurance companies. I mean, if you have all of your people in a specific area as like your so-called book of business goes, and then you have a loss that takes away all of those dollars, like man, like that's a huge undertaking, right, for insurance companies.
Yeah, going back on that, the population at 2016 for Fort McMurray was 66,000. So you got to think probably you add maybe another 4,000 after 5 years. So maybe 70,000, give or take, people during that forest fire. But again, like it did spread. So it obviously impacted a lot of people, probably farms and stuff. But yeah, just alone from that one event was $5.4 billion.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where it really highlights the importance of having multiple different insurance companies out there offering. I mean, because if we were in an area where it was all
One, if you
yeah,
had one
right,
company to pick
right.
from.
Right. Or like you have like your two or three, and they're basically assuming all of that risk themselves, and something happens. I mean, you got to dig deep to pay out those bills, right? Not to mention how many people you need on staff just to re-facilitate everyone that ends up having a loss.
Exactly.
Um,
No, it kind of gives you options, right? Because like you were saying, if there's only one insurance company and this happens with one insurance company, the rates would just go through the roof all the time. So that's why
yeah,
it's nice because yeah, like we can spread the risk across multiple companies so that we're not seeing massive rate increases because if one company is taking on all the risk and all the risk is being impacted, you're going to see massive increases instead of like little ones when we spread
yeah.
risk across multiple companies, right?
And it's, I mean, a good little segue there to the fact that home insurance. And I know we touched on this last week, but again, home and auto insurance, you're basically covering the losses of those few among the many, right? That's the whole idea. So if we have 10 people that have claims, but you have a pool of 1,000 people, everyone's dollars go into that. It also helps alleviate that right across the board for everyone. I mean, when you have a claim, typically speaking, you are going to see more than someone that doesn't. That's just how the industry works, right? There's discounts that are applied. There's different underwriting criteria that goes into people that do have a claim, and I know a lot of people might think, if I've had a claim, but I've paid insurance for the last 20 years, it's just something that I'm owed, and we got to change that mindset because that is not how that's not the idea of insurance, right? The idea of insurance is to hopefully let's focus on home for a second, especially with weather. But you have that massive fire loss that you cannot afford to rebuild your home yourself. That is typically the reason why you have home insurance, right? That's what it was intended for when it was started.
No, 100%. And then um the a little bit of a short kind of conversation that I want to have, but when people kind of say like, "Oh, like why do I have to pay for other people's like accidents, pay for other people's tickets, claims, that kind of stuff?" The how I really kind of like explain to people, it's kind of like how our healthcare system works in like Ontario and Canada. We all pay for healthcare. We might not all use it. I've been to the hospital like once, and it was like for like a procedure to take like my adenoids out so I could breathe. But I don't ever go to the hospital. I don't ever really go to my doctor very often, but I pay. But there are people that are like in the hospital in and out every single day, every other day, and we're paying for those people. So that's kind of how insurance kind of almost works is that like, yeah, like you're paying based on your reports and your record and your experience and all that kind of stuff. But there is a portion of it that, yeah, you're paying on the patterns that are happening in the industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that we always talk about, or the one example that I think resonates with people is there are certain types of vehicles out there that there is more of them on the road,
Like
more
a
of them
Honda
in,
Civic.
right. And I mean that's a perfect example, right? Like that's the one I typically say when talking to clients that are looking at vehicles because yeah, we can't create a rate and say this is what you're just going to pay for this vehicle. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. But if we want to be very generalized, there is tons of Civics on the road. They make a fantastic car, but there's more of them on the road that then are involved in accidents, more of them that are involved possibly in, fraudulent claims. There's just more of that data to go from, which obviously means, the insurance companies rate those types of vehicles accordingly. And it's not meant to be, against anyone individually. That's just a general consensus, right? Across the board. Now, some vehicles, and again, this is going really, really kind of deep into it, but obviously every vehicle has, those so-called rate groups, which I know a lot of the general people aren't going to understand, but basically they're what the insurance companies look at when dividing, what a rate is for a certain vehicle. Certain vehicles have a higher possibility of being stolen, right? Let's just use trucks as an example. So of course you might end up paying more for that truck because that's, there's a higher possibility of theft, right? Or just one example, right? But that's one of the going back, James, what you were saying, one of the big reasons why, rates are the way they are for specific vehicles. And as a pool, we just kind of all pay into this. And there's only so much that you can really do, right, to offset that yourself.
No, 100%. But moving back to the weather side of things, if I'm literally just looking at the top 10 highest losses in like insurance and in Canada, so we'll go from 20, so we'll go from 10 to 1. So 2005, 2019, 2012, 2011, 2021, 2018, 2020, 1998, 2013, and 2016. Do you see kind of any pattern in all those years that I just named off?
What those were the
Those are the years that the losses happened. Do you see any like massive pattern?
No, fill me in.
So the pattern that I'm seeing is that these are all very recent years within the last 10 years. So like number 9, number 8, number 11, number 6, number 5, number 4, number 2, and number 1. So literally, out of all these claims, out of the top 10, only 2 of them have happened out of the last 10 years. 8 of them have happened in the last 8 of them have happened in the last 10 years. So obviously we are seeing that the weather is impacting insurance more now, obviously, than it did 20, 30 years ago. Because the stats don't lie. Like, we're making these massive claims, and that means the weather is obviously changing, and that means weather is obviously impacting insurance and insurance rates moving forward in the last 10 years at least. Because like I said, 8 of 10 of these biggest record losses has been the last 10 years. And actually 2 of them were in Fort McMurray, whereas the fire in 2016, and then 4 years after in 2020, they had the big flood and hailstorm that they had. So my question is, like, are we doing enough as insurance companies to kind of like stopping this? Like, have you seen anything? Like, what would you kind of want to see from insurance companies? Because like you were saying, water is obviously a huge one that we see, and now wind and tornadoes are becoming one too. Like, are we doing enough as insurance companies to kind of battle this and to help clients out?
Yeah, man, tough. It's a tough question, right? I mean, the easy answer is, I mean, yes. I mean, insurance companies are there to help pay for the loss, right? Help getting clients back into what they were before, and going through that process together, both the clients and us as brokers and insurance companies in general. The idea is to get that client back to the way it is. I mean, if with weather continuously changing, there's only so much that's doable from an insurance company's side, right? They don't have that crystal ball to say what's it going to be like next year. How do we combat that, right? I mean, as weather continues to change, and as we see a shift in where the damages are coming from, right? I think water is probably like what, maybe every 7 or 8 or 10 claims is a water related claim.
Yeah, I think the stat was from 2020. Out of 7 out of 10 home claims were water related.
Right, like in some way, right? It's whether it's a result of a sump pump failure, or maybe it's a sewer line backup, or it's just kind of this overland water idea, right? Where it's coming in through basement foundation windows or doors, or just eaves troughs, or whatever number is. People are submitting claims as a result of it's the wind and the rain together, right? Well, and typically they do happen together, right? You see these massive storms. Somebody loses, 3 bundles of shingles off the roof. They also have this rain coming in at like a 90-degree angle, right? That's basically going underneath siding and shingles and whatnot, and then causing water damage, right? So that's the big thing. I know we all typically look at home insurance as like fire policies, and that's how they started. But in the last decade, I think it has transitioned to water and wind together types of claims. So how do we combat that? I mean, the answer is, I think, just to educate the average consumer more and more to the point where we all know where those exposures are coming from. There's no way that you can you can get out to every single person, right, and tell them what their exposures are.
No, you're never going to be able to get to every single person, but as long as you can educate the people that you're talking to, that's you're doing your job if you're able to do that, right? And I think we've
Yeah.
seen, like you were saying, coming from the water side, like obviously we've seen a huge shift in like different water coverages. Like before it was just sewer backup. Now they have overland, they have groundwater, they have sewer lines. Like companies have all these other things. But I think it's just a matter of time until insurance companies really jump on and make changes to like the wind coverages. Like there's gotta be a time where insurance companies in Ontario and like Canada in general, again, I can't really speak on Western provinces or Eastern provinces a lot because I know that they get more of this kind of weather because the Western provinces are more flatter areas, not really covered by like the environment. Like they don't really have like mountains unless you get out to like BC and stuff in Alberta. But there's got to be a time where Ontario insurance companies like say, you know what, we got to update this and like we got to cover for like tornado. I know like a lot of it is covered under catastrophic, but I think there's got to become a time where like tornado kind of comes out of the catastrophic and there's actually like a straight up like coverage that goes under your insurance policy other than just a catastrophic loss.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you could shift that too, though, because technically speaking, the average home policy does not cover for earthquake, right? There's usually exclusions for earthquake unless you buy the additional coverage for that. And there's different variances about, what your deductible might be and what actually is considered an earthquake. And of course, in history, we haven't really had a ton, if any, damage from that. There might be little tremors once every whatever is 20 years or something that someone says, "Oh, did you feel that?" Right? But insurance companies really haven't had to worry about that. Does that change for wind? I mean, it's tough. We're talking about this, James, as it's probably going to be shifting over the next 5 or 10 years. So I think it's kind of coincidental, right? That we're like, let's talk about climate. I mean, we might see shifts because water, if you look back 10 years before the water shifts happened, which was, 2013, 2014, 2015, it was only specific types of water. And I think it was just sewer backup, but it was more encompassing at the time. Whereas then they started to make those shifts to different types of coverages, right? And what you have to purchase or not purchase. And every company took its own approach to that. Maybe that happens. Maybe we go through this where in the next 10 years, it's like, oh, there's different types of wind losses, right? And there's ways to prevent against that or things you can do to mitigate. Like, I guess time will tell.
Yeah, it's really only going to be a guessing game at that point and what people are going to do. There is kind of there was there's an organization that I'm very personally involved in, so I don't really want to I don't want to say like and use them as like like these are the only people doing something, but because I'm like personally like attached to them, like I've been a part of Ducks Unlimited. I don't know if you're really aware of them, but they're like a conservation organization, so they conserve a lot of like wetlands and stuff. And
Okay.
they're based out of Manitoba, but they do a lot of work like across Canada and stuff. But I was actually trying to get in touch with them because they were building this like what they called the nature force for insurance companies to get involved in to kind of help mitigate like flood risks in Ontario and across Canada. So now as of March, they started this, like, I guess the task force with 15 insurance companies, a lot of big companies, like you see Aviva here, SGI, Travelers, Wawanesa. There's a few smaller like Intax here, Hub International. Like there's a few other companies too, Economical. But yeah, they've all kind of joined forces to kind of help, like let people understand and kind of defend against like a water risks and a lot of flooding that we are having in Ontario. So I think that's going to be very good. Like I really wanted to be a part of this. It just kind of really didn't really work out in our eyes because they were going after like insurance companies, not brokerages. But again, like I'm really happy that a lot of these companies got involved because it's a huge, huge part of insurance, especially on the home side, to really decrease the amount of flood risks that we're having right now. And for a big, like I said, a big company, again, like they started in the States, but they do have like a Canadian chapter. But to get a lot of these big companies on board is a huge like bravo to them, because it's a very hard, not only to get one, but to get 15 and for them to all like kind of work together under one project is, I think, is huge.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any way to help combat the exposure, right, which only is going to help, it's going to help them have less payouts, right, in the event of claims, which is great because obviously you're mitigating some of that risk yourself, right, and being a part of that, which is huge. So I guess we'll just see, right, as time progresses.
Yeah. So, yeah. Do you have any topics you want to talk about weather, or kind of wrap it all up?
No, I think that we, in general, right? I mean, the biggest thing that I can tell people is from an education standpoint is to ask your broker agent more about maybe what you're insured for and really focus on the water. I've personally seen a lot of different insurance companies limit or not provide coverage on policies depending on where people live. So I think it's super important for people to kind of, as like my final thought, is to discuss what types of water coverages they have or what they might want, right? Because again, every insurance company has a different look on that and what you qualify for and want. But also is to, just educate yourself a little bit better on that. Obviously by listening to us and
yeah. Subscribing and listening to us every episode.
Yeah, get some information and obviously, the self plug. Give us a call. Let us have a conversation and quote out your home or auto insurance and see if we can save you some money with some coverages that you're looking for. But yeah, I think the big thing is just education, right? Just because you've lived somewhere for 30 years doesn't mean that it cannot happen to your basement. The climate is changing, and as a result, I think we're seeing more and more things types of happen. So it's got to be more of a conversation piece. It can't just be the status quo. And do not assume that your insurance company is, if you pay them for 30 years, is just there to pay out in the event of a claim, because as coverage options become available, you may or may not have those. Right.
Exactly. So always check, because things are always changing. Just because you're with a company for 30 years, like Mike said, like doesn't mean that they're always adding all the up-to-date coverages for you. You really need to make sure you're reviewing your stuff. And if you're listening to this, and like I said, if you guys want more information, definitely subscribe. And as our episodes continue to grow, and like I said, we usually post every Tuesday, once a week for new topics. But if you're really, really curious and want to learn a little bit more, like I said, the Canadian Underwriter is a great little website to go to. If you want to like learn more about like what's going on in the industry, like they basically touch base on everything. They touch base on the personal side, commercial side, like everything. So they're a good little website to check out as well. In the description of the podcast, I will leave the link to the Nature Force website. So if anyone wants to check them out, like I said, they're associated with Ducks Unlimited, and they're associated with 15 other insurance companies that kind of, like I said, are kind of mitigating the flood risks that we're seeing happening a lot. So if you want to check them out, check them out. But yeah, I think just the biggest thing is just really be aware, really make sure you're prepared, and just review your policy. I know we talk about this every single week, but just review your policy, because as the weather patterns continue to change, because they are always changing, and companies update their coverages, you need to make sure that they're updating them on your policy as well, because not all, like, they're dealing with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of clients. Not every time are they going to add it on for everyone. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll send out letters actually to say like, hey, if you want this, like we can add it on. But if you don't respond back to them, they won't add it on. So just make sure you're staying aware, and if there are updates, to really make a decision and understand like what that update is, and then go from there, whatever's going to best suit you and your situation. So that's kind of where I would leave that.
Yeah, and give us a call. Let us quote your stuff.
Yeah, the self plug every time.
And then also come back for more episodes, as we have a lot of insight to give.
Yes, we're trying to work on some people to get on on the podcast as well, like a guest appearances. Like I would definitely love to have like the Nature Force people on the podcast to kind of understand a little bit more about what they do. So that would be a great idea to have them on. I know that we've been talking with a lot of dealership people, like real estates, lawyers, that kind of stuff, to get people on. So it's only going to be a matter of time until people do get on. But I did want to say thank you to people that have been listening. Like the support's been really, really good so far, for the little amount of content that we're sending out. So I really appreciate people that are listening every week, because it kind of gets us going. Like we want to make this stuff. Like we are really passionate about making these episodes, but to kind of see like people listening that actually like taking interest in what we're doing, that really helps us like motivate ourselves and like to want to put out more. So I know Mike would say thank you, but just between me and Mike, like just thank you for listening. And yeah, we really appreciate the support so far.
And check us out on episode 4, which is next week.
Yes, episode 4. We're going to be moving towards kind of the supply chain issues that we're having. Not only just, we're going to talk a lot about the auto side, but a little bit more of a touch, I know, from episode 2 with the whole rebuild situation on homes, and obviously how the supply chain is affecting that. But we are going to keep it a lot about on the auto side and how claims have been affected by that, and how parts and vehicles in general are just taking a lot. So like I said, the weather one will come out this Thursday. So we're recording this on June 1st. So June 2nd, that will come out. And then next Tuesday, which is the June 7th, the auto one will come out. So thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week.